The archival chamber hummed with a low, consistent thrum, a sound Blake had long since ceased to consciously register. It was a symphony of climate control and aging fluorescent lights, a backdrop to the meticulous process of preserving history. Blake, an archivist of some 2 decades, found comfort in the predictable rhythm of the work, the crisp rustle of parchment, the faint, sweet scent of decaying paper, the methodical indexing of forgotten lives. Their station, a polished oak desk scarred by generations of similar work, was a fortress of order amidst the chaotic expanse of human record. Today, however, the order felt fragile. It began with a minor deviation during the recataloguing of Section Gamma 7, a collection of miscellaneous donations deemed too insignificant for individual accession. Blake's gloved fingers, accustomed to the delicate touch required for brittle documents, encountered an anomaly. Tucked away beneath a stack of faded agricultural reports from the mid-20th century lay a small, unadorned wooden box. It was roughly 8 inches square, crafted from an unfamiliar dark wood, its surface smooth and featureless, devoid of clasps or hinges. It simply sat there, a silent, unassuming void in the otherwise overflowing shelves. Blake lifted it. It was heavier than its size suggested, possessing a density that felt almost unnatural. There was no inscription, no label, nothing to indicate its origin or contents. A quick scan of the Gamma 7 manifest yielded no entry for such an item. It was an orphan, an oversight. This alone was enough to pique Blake's professional curiosity. Every item in the archive, no matter how trivial, had a provenance. Placing the box carefully on the desk, he examined it under the focused beam of their task lamp. The wood seemed to absorb the light, reflecting little. As Blake's gaze lingered, a subtle shift occurred at the edge of their vision. The neatly stacked files on an adjacent shelf seemed to ripple, a momentary distortion of their straight lines. He blinked, attributing it to eye strain. The files were, of course, perfectly still. Odd, Blake murmured, the sound swallowed by the chamber's hum. A colleague, a younger archivist named Davies, passed by, pushing a trolley laden with incoming donations. "Find anything interesting, he?" Davies' voice was bright, oblivious. Blake turned, the box momentarily forgotten. Just an unlisted item. An old wooden box. Davies glanced at it, then shrugged. Probably just some personal effects someone forgot to claim. Happens. Davies continued down the aisle. He returned to the box. The distortion had not recurred. He ran a gloved finger over its surface. It was perfectly smooth, no seams, no discernible lid. It was a paradox, a box with no apparent opening. This contradiction, this defiance of expectation, was the first seed of unease. Blake spent the remainder of the afternoon attempting to locate any record of the box, consulting old acquisition logs and cross-referencing donor lists. Nothing. It simply did not exist within the archive's meticulously maintained records. This was not merely an oversight, it was an impossibility. Every item had a story, a path into the collection. This box had none. It was as if it had simply manifested. He found themselves returning to the box repeatedly, not to find an opening, but simply to observe it. As evening approached, the archive gradually emptied. Blake was alone. With a methodical precision that belied a growing tremor in their hands, he picked up the box again. This time, as their fingers closed around it, a faint pressure registered, not physical, but internal. It was as if the box was not merely a container, but a point of focus for something immense and unseen. The air around Blake felt thicker, more resonant. He dismissed it. Fatigue. Imagination. Yet, the subtle psychological erosion had begun. The meticulous order of Blake's world had been breached by a single, uncatalogued item. The quiet hum of the archive no longer offered comfort, it now seemed to vibrate with an unspoken tension, a prelude to something he could not yet comprehend. The following days became a focused, almost obsessive investigation. Blake isolated the box on a separate cart, away from other materials, as if its presence might contaminate the integrity of the archive. The initial anomaly, the absence of its record, had deepened into a profound mystery. He spent hours in the research section, poring over obscure texts on forgotten crafts, ancient locking mechanisms, esoteric symbols, searching for any clue that might explain the box's construction or purpose. "You're still on that box, Blake?" The supervisor, a man named Henderson, paused by his desk one afternoon, a stack of quarterly reports under his arm. "Is it really worth this much attention? We have a backlog." Blake looked up, eyes slightly bloodshot from lack of sleep. "It's peculiar, sir. I haven't been able to identify its origin. No seams, no discernible lid. It defies conventional joinery." He held it up, rotating it slowly. "It's perfectly smooth." Henderson peered at it, then tapped it with a knuckle. "Solid, I suppose. Just a block of wood, then. Perhaps a paperweight someone left behind." He shrugged, dismissing it. "Move it to the lost and found. We have more pressing matters." "I can't, sir," Blake stated, their voice firm despite the tremor beneath. "It feels significant." Henderson sighed. "Significance is in the eye of the archivist, But we need to prioritize. Dedicate your time to the new accessions." He walked away, leaving Blake with the silent, unyielding object. He ignored the directive. The box had become an anchor point for a growing disquiet. The subtle shifts in perception intensified. The fluorescent lights would flicker for a fraction of a second, just enough to register, then stabilize, leaving he questioning whether it was a fault in the wiring or in their own vision. One evening, alone in the archive, Blake was meticulously examining the box under a magnifying lens, searching for any microscopic fissure or imperfection. There was none. It was flawless. It was not etched or carved, but appeared to be an intrinsic part of the wood grain, shifting and reforming as Blake tilted the box. It was a complex, recursive design, like fractals of an alien geometry, constantly in flux. This pattern, invisible to the casual observer, seemed to rearrange Blake's very perception of space. The pattern on the box pulsed faintly, a silent response. It was not a physical pulse, but a shift in the perceived depth of the grain, as if the pattern was not on the surface, but within the wood, stretching into an infinite interior. Blake felt a profound sense of isolation. No one else saw this. No one else could comprehend the subtle, terrifying implications. Was it the box, or was it his own mind beginning to unravel? The question became a constant companion, a nagging doubt that eroded Blake's confidence. They began to question their own memories, small details of their routine, the exact placement of files, the precise wording of instructions. Had the archive always been this silent? Had the fluorescent lights always hummed with such an insistent drone? His determination to understand the box now mingled with a desperate need to understand the shifting landscape of their own sanity. The isolation deepened. Blake started taking meals alone, avoiding the break room, where the mundane chatter of colleagues felt jarring, unreal. They spent their evenings in the archive, long after everyone else had left, bathed in the cool, blue light of the task lamp, fixated on the enigmatic box. The recursive pattern became clearer, more insistent. It was not merely a design, it was a language, a silent, visual dialect that spoke of impossible dimensions and non-Euclidean spaces. It was a catalyst. It was slowly, meticulously, dismantling the established architecture of Blake's reality. The truth, however unsettling, held an irresistible allure. The direct manifestations began subtly, then with terrifying intensity. Blake had been tracing the shifting patterns on the box for hours, fingers hovering inches above its surface, when a faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the wood. It was not a vibration, but a shift in its inherent stillness, as if the material itself was breathing. He leaned closer, their breath held. Suddenly, a seam appeared on the box. It was as if the box was momentarily revealing its true, alien geometry, a glimpse into its impossible interior. A sound, not heard but felt, resonated in his skull, a low, resonant thrum, like the universe itself vibrating on an unheard frequency. The air in the archive grew heavy, charged with an unknown energy. The box responded. It was not a physical form, but an impression, a shadow cast from a dimension beyond human comprehension. It had no discernible features, no limbs, no head, yet Blake felt an undeniable, crushing presence, an intelligence that dwarfed all human understanding. This was the cosmic horror. It was not a monster with teeth and claws, but a fundamental truth, a reality that had always existed, veiled by the comforting illusions of human perception. The box was not an artifact that contained the horror, it was an artifact that revealed it, by stripping away the layers of his conditioned reality. Blake felt their minds splintering. The familiar walls of the archive seemed to melt and flow, the shelves twisting into grotesque parodies of themselves. The meticulous order he had cherished dissolved into chaos. Memories, once firm and reliable, now flickered like dying embers, their authenticity questioned by the overwhelming presence. The horror was not an external entity to be fought, but the very fabric of existence, now perceived without the filter of human senses. It was the crushing indifference of an infinite, unknowable universe. They were not words, but pure meaning, pouring into his mind, shattering the linear progression of thought. Blake saw, not with their eyes, but with a newly awakened faculty, glimpses of impossible geometries, of dimensions folding into themselves, of realities coexisting in a single, terrifying point. The horror was the realization that he, and all of humanity, were merely fleeting thoughts in a vast, unknowable consciousness, or perhaps, not even thoughts at all, merely temporary arrangements of matter, destined to dissolve back into the cosmic indifference. He was no longer just an observer, they were becoming a part of the horror, their mind a conduit for its infinite, silent zone. Blake's sanity, a once meticulously maintained structure, had completely crumbled. The archive no longer existed as a coherent space. The hum of the ventilation system had become a throbbing pulse, an internal rhythm that seemed to emanate from his own core. The lines between what was Blake and what was the perceived reality had blurred to the point of non-existence. He
Are you in here? Henderson's voice, distant and distorted, cut through the cacophony of Blake's fracturing mind. The supervisor's face, when it appeared in the doorway, was a shifting mosaic of impossible angles, his features rearranging themselves with each blink of his eyes. Blake could not respond. Their tongue felt thick, their thoughts too vast and formless to coalesce into coherent speech. The box, which had been the catalyst, now seemed to be an extension of his own consciousness, its impossible patterns echoing the fractal shattering within Blake's skull. What are you doing? The lights are out. You need to leave. Henderson moved closer, his form flickering, momentarily becoming a collection of disjointed geometric shapes, then resolving back into his familiar, albeit now monstrous, human outline. Blake felt an undeniable pull, a profound compulsion to move. The border checkpoint. The thought surfaced from the depths of the overwhelming chaos, a single, clear directive. It was not a memory, but a sudden, intrinsic knowing. The checkpoint was not a destination, it was a threshold. He pushed past Henderson, who stumbled back, a look of confusion and alarm on his face. Blake! Wait! You can't just leave. But he was already moving, their steps steady despite the internal tempest. The streets outside were a kaleidoscope of sensory input. Buildings stretched and compressed, the sky pulsed with colors unseen by human eyes, and the sounds of traffic resolved into complex, interwoven melodies of pure energy. Blake walked with a singular purpose, the box, now an invisible presence within their mind, guiding them. The journey to the border checkpoint was a passage through a world simultaneously familiar and utterly alien. He saw the horror in the mundane, the patterns on the pavement, the arrangement of leaves on a tree, the fleeting expressions on passers-by. Each detail was a glimpse into the infinite, the unknowable, each a fragment of the vast, indifferent entity that underpinned all existence. Blake's identity was no longer a fixed point but a shimmering, unstable thing, constantly dissolving and reforming, a mirror reflecting the cosmic chaos. At the checkpoint, the scene was ordinary. Vehicles queued, documents were exchanged, a mundane passage between two territories. For he, however, it was the culmination of everything. The air here was thick with a palpable tension, a sense of imminence. The concrete barriers, the chain-link fences, the watchful eyes of the border officials, these were not merely physical obstacles, but symbolic boundaries, thin veils separating one reality from another. Blake approached the booth, the border official's face a study in bureaucratic neutrality. The man's uniform, his badge, his very posture, seemed to vibrate with the same impossible geometry he had seen on the box. He was not just a man, he was a manifestation, a gatekeeper between states of being. Papers, please, the official stated, his voice flat, devoid of inflection. Blake reached into their pocket, their hand moving as if of its own accord. There were no papers. There was only the sensation of infinite space, of an identity that had shattered and reformed into something new, something that transcended the need for documentation. The official's gaze sharpened, not with suspicion, but with a profound, unsettling recognition. His eyes, for a fleeting moment, seemed to hold the same ancient, unknowable patterns he had perceived in the box. The words were not a request, but a statement of inherent truth. The crossing was inevitable. The official, after a moment of unsettling stillness, simply nodded, a slow, deliberate movement that seemed to carry the weight of eons. Proceed. Blake walked forward, past the barrier, past the watchful eyes, past the queued vehicles.
The air on the other side of the checkpoint was identical, the road stretched out in the same manner, the landscape was indistinguishable. Yet, everything was profoundly different. The colors of the sky were no longer mere hues, they were vibrations, frequencies of an incomprehensible spectrum. He saw the patterns now, everywhere. The dust motes dancing in the sunlight were not random, they traced intricate, recursive geometries. Blake's identity, once a singular, defined construct, had dissolved completely. There was no longer he the archivist, the meticulous keeper of records. There was only perception, a vast, unbounded awareness that encompassed all that was and all that could be. Blake was no longer an individual observing the cosmic horror, he was the cosmic horror, or at least, a fragment of its infinite, indifferent consciousness. The wooden box, the catalyst, was gone. It had never been a physical object in the conventional sense, but a key, a focal point for the shift. Now, the entire world was the box, and Blake was inside, outside, and everywhere in between. He continued walking, one foot after the other, the rhythm of their steps echoing the silent pulse of the universe. They had crossed the border, not into another country, but into another reality. The horror was not an event that had ended, it was the fundamental state of being, now fully apprehended. The archivist had become the archive, a living repository of infinite, incomprehensible truths. The road stretched onward, seemingly endless, under a sky that throbbed with silent, alien light. Blake felt no fear, no joy, no sadness. Only a vast, crushing indifference. The destination was not a place, but a state of being. And he, or what remained of Blake, had arrived. The cosmic entity had found its vessel, its new point of observation in a reality that had always been its own.